Great. Thank you everyone for being here and joining us this evening for this celebration, the celebration of Cassandra Lane's new book, We Are Bridges, a Memoir. Tonight she will be in conversation with Jamia Wilson, the editor of this book. So to begin, my name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And as we gather here today, it is essential to acknowledge the time we're living in and the current circumstances we are all navigating. MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter in recognizing and condemning the ongoing systemic violence against Black people. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Casey Goodson Jr., Patrick Warren Sr., Andre Hill, Dante Wright, Anthony Thompson Jr., Ma'Khia Bryant, and so many others who have lost their lives from police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. We want to acknowledge that MOAD's commitment to racial justice is ongoing, and as such, we will continue to say their names to hold space and honor these victims. I also want to acknowledge the spaces that we're occupying. And though we're gathered virtually, many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent. And our institutions were founded on the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose lands we are located. It is with deep respect that MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area and beyond who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And with that, it truly is an honor to be gathering here with all of you tonight to celebrate Cassandra Lane's new book, We Are Bridges, a Memoir. This is an absolutely stunning book. I just finished reading it and I'm so thrilled to be here with both Jamia and Cassandra to engage in this discussion. And so with that, I will introduce our two speakers for tonight and then turn it over to them for the conversation. Cassandra Lane is a writer and editor based in Los Angeles. Lane received her MFA from Antioch University, LA. Her stories have appeared in the New York Times Conception Series, the Times Picayune, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and elsewhere. She is editor-in-chief of LA Parent Magazine and formerly served on the board of A Room of Her Own Foundation. Jamia Wilson is a feminist activist, writer, and speaker. She joined Penguin Random House as vice president and executive editor in 2021. As former director at the Feminist Press at the City University of New York and the former VP of programs at the Women's Media Center, Jamia has been a leading voice on women's rights issues for over a decade. Her work has appeared in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, Today Show, CNN, and others. And she is the author of many books, including Young, Gifted, and Black, The Introduction in Oral History and Together We Rise, Step Into Your Power, and co-author for Roadmap for Revolutionaries. And with that, I will pass it off to Jamia.
Thank you so much, Nia, and thank you, Cassandra, and thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. I feel so honored to be in conversation with each of you tonight and want to thank you for hosting this space, MOAD, celebrating the beautiful African diaspora and also celebrating the work of Black artists, something that's close to my heart, and the ancestors who made it possible for us to be here. And that's one of the reasons I was so drawn to Cassandra's book when I was the director at Feminist Press and one of the judges for our Louise Merriweather Prize. And when reading through all of these beautiful submissions and just being torn by all of the stories that each of them gripping my heart, and then seeing this submission from Cassandra Lane that spoke to the depths of my soul, that connected in a way that seemed like blood memory to so many of the themes that many of us are searching for. What does it mean to unearth the stories of our ancestors, and in those stories find new things out about ourselves, find old stories that are alchemized into something new? What does it mean to re-envision and create a new future with memory? And Cassandra has done that. And I was joined by a distinguished group of judges who were so enthusiastic about this submission, so much so that her memoir, weaving the story of her great-grandfather's lynching with her experience of becoming a mother, became our 2020 Louise Merriweather Book Prize winner and became a very important landmark year prize winner in the 50th anniversary of the feminist press. So it is a great honor to me to be talking with you now, having been an editor on this book, as a Black woman this week. Okay, can we just talk about this week? And just as someone who's admired your writing for quite some time and various different mediums and platforms, but admiring what it took for you to create this work of art for you and for your family, but for all of us in the midst of all the other identities that you hold as a mother and a writer and an editor and a human, all of those things. So to you, I now ask the first question. How do you feel knowing that this book is out in the world?
Thank you, Jamia, and thank you, Nia. Thank you, Moed. I'm so, first of all, just excited to be here. This is wonderful. This project, working on this project with you, Jamia, and with Feminist Press has truly been the highlight of my career, of my life. So one of my friends put it best. It's bittersweet, the unfolding of the book, bringing this book to the world. Of course, I'm very excited. This has been a long journey, and I'm excited to have it in readers' hands, but I'm also very sad that, you know, the topics are still so pertinent. I took on this project thinking, let me focus on this ancestral trauma to heal, you know, work on healing myself. And then when I became a mom, or when I was pregnant, I thought this is something that my son needs to know. He needs to know about this history. Little did I know that here he is, you know, as a preteen and now teen, that he would be on social media seeing what I call modern day lynchings happening right in America still. So many that we can't keep up with them. So many names to say. And so it's very, very bittersweet.
And you know, this modern day lynching, and you're right, that's exactly what's happening, you know, the subject of lynching. So when I was reading your submission, you know, when we first met through the page, that was something that struck me, that you were going into this, something that I know is so hard for us. And, you know, many of us have stories in our families that we've heard about lynchings, or if we haven't heard about them in our families, have imagined that it probably happened to someone close to our family, or heard the stories of others in our community who had them. And so when I saw that you chose this subject, but to go deeply within it, which I'm sure entailed a lot of your own sort of mental and psychic and spiritual fortitude having to be summoned and conjured during that time, it drew me to you as an author to really be curious about, okay, what does it mean to her to have to stare this pain in the face in order to reveal? And so I wanted to ask you what you're thinking about this week, and the emotions that so many of us are having, that we might be able to learn from you and your process about how we can use art as a way to take action. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because that's what I really was drawn to, in addition to your amazing prose, just that, oh, you're using memoir to take action and to bring forth an important social issue.
First of all, journal, like, you know, writing down what's happening, even if it's just a few scratches at night. I know sometimes it's hard for me to think about and write about what's happening currently because it's just so much. But I think we have a responsibility to record. I come from a journalism background and, you know, often covered tragedies, emergencies, and I'm so used to taking notes. talking to people about their different, perspectives on the story, on what happened. And so I think it's our duty to record what's happening to our young people in our communities, because our children and our children's children are going to want to know what we were doing and what we were saying about it. And when you take those notes, when you record, you can come back to it. If you're a writer, for instance, you can come back to those thoughts later. I know that when I was revising this book last year under contract and all of, everything that was going on, some of that got into this story because even though I was writing about Burt, it all seemed so immediate. And so there's one section where I talk about, Burt's love of nature and insects and how he doesn't hurt an insect. And that was a direct kind of relation to what was happening. And his name is escaping me, but Elijah, and how he was begging police to, he doesn't hurt him, saying how he does yoga and he's vegan. And I mean, I was torn up like so many of us were by his last words. And that weaved its way into my story, part of my story about Burt. And because I don't have him begging and pleading with the sheriffs who are dragging him to the lynching. He knows that wouldn't have helped. Whatever he was into, his passions, that just would not have mattered. In fact, it might have, enraged them even more. So I think we have a responsibility to take those notes, to record, and then tell those stories as they're unfolding.
And I'm just taking in what you said about beautiful Elijah, who I was drawn to, and connecting them, having read the book and Burt's story, and just feeling a profound connection there. I am thinking about, you were talking about what it means to record, and I was thinking about how that connects to memory and how you go in a journey of discovery around memory, but also play with memory in the book. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the role of memory in the book and what you've learned about memory.
Yeah, it is interesting because I come from a journalism factual background, but there was something about studying creative nonfiction and studying some wonderful writers who played with memory, even in their creative nonfiction, that really expanded it was liberating. And also listening to poets. I don't write poetry, but poets absolutely influence my work, allow for flexibility. I'm interested in the questions around a piece of, around an experience. And again, even in journalism, go cover a fire. Two people are going to have completely, sometimes different, perspectives on what happened. And it just happened 30 minutes ago. And so memory is something that's very fluid. Memory is something that's not set in stone. And so as I began to write and realized that there was not much information about my great-grandfather, Burt Bridges, a lot of the records had been burned in a courthouse fire. I did since hire a Mississippi researcher who believes we found the same Burt Bridges on a census report. But again, other than that, there just wasn't much to go on. And I just refused. There was something about, I don't know, I just refused to let it end at that. Like, you took him from us, you took him from his child, his unborn child. I want to somehow bring him back to life on the page, give him a voice, give him a story. And, I didn't know if at the time, at one point I just did away with genres, and I just thought, I'm going to write this story. I don't know what it's going to be called eventually in terms of genre, but that freed me up, I think, when I separated myself from giving it a genre. And Feminist Press was very much open to that, playing around with memory and fact. And I try to be very upfront about that in the beginning. So thank you for supporting that.
I think that's what I thought was really beautiful about it, because I've read a lot of studies about how that is more accurate to how memory is experienced by us and how we navigate between between time and space and how we remember things. It's not always linear.
Mhm.
And so I love that you dove into that. And I feel that that's why, as a reader, it felt very real to me, this exploration, and felt very real and beautiful.
Mm,
So,
absolutely. And that makes me think of even funny things like with my siblings. You know, they remember situations differently sometimes than I do. And a couple of friends and I were on the phone the other night, and they were like, they were talking about something that had happened in New Orleans 20 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, that really happened. And they were like, Sand, you told us about that. So yeah, it's really, but then I'll remember something very, very specific that someone else might not remember. So memory, the brain is interesting and fascinating in that way.
it is. And I was thinking a lot about this too, and reading the book and reading about, you, and thinking about how you were countering erasure by kind of writing memory into this historical moment and touch point, and that also feeling very political to me. And so I was wondering how you feel about that statement. um did it feel like that to you when you were writing it, or was it more like this is about a familial yearning for discovery, or a mix of that?
Oh, I think it was definitely a mix. I felt entitled to give them a story. Um, First, I had some anger towards my great grandmother, Mary, for what I considered at the time withholding, although now I understand why she did that. I think at that time in my life, late 20s, when I first started looking at it, early 30, maybe 30, I I was just dealing with a lot of internal issues. I was in therapy, um, and I had all these questions about the past and about my own journey. And so I was angry that we didn't have any records, the story of Burt. Um, and so at first it was sort of like, oh, I'm going to write this, and it was just a sense of entitlement even towards her. But later, as I continued to work on it, a s- I felt like it was my story, and I was going to take ownership of it. So it definitely was both of those. It felt familiar, creating some of the characters, some of those imagined characters. Those are people. They're based on people that I know. My grandmother, her friends in the neighborhood. So it was definitely very, very familiar, but also it was, I think, a political act too of reclaiming. Definitely.
Yeah, and when you were saying Mary, I just wanted to say to those who might not have read the book yet, but excited for when you do, which you can purchase it also tonight, that I love Mary's name, and Mary Magdalene Magee. I felt like, what a
I
beautiful
know.
name.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fascinated and obsessed by names and meanings. And even when parents don't intentionally name their kids based on what the meaning of those names are, and how they still end up being so relevant and telling a story to that person's life. So Mary comes from the word that means bitter and sorrow. And it's like, oh my God, if her parents knew, would they have named her that? Or, maybe it was a biblical thing, but yeah, it's so fascinating to me, the naming of a child.
And we can't have that conversation without talking about your name. So I thought about that a lot too, and the story of Cassandra, and just being a truth teller, but also, having the ability to have sight,
Mm,
to be prophetic, but not always believed.
mm,
And so I was wanting to ask you what you thought about that, because I have always been drawn to that story. And over the past 5 years, with everything that was going on politically and culturally, kept thinking about how often so many of us felt like Cassandras,
mm,
and
mhm.
wondered if and how that might connect with you as well, because I love the names, and thinking of the Mary Magdalene as truth teller as well, and as one who has been the first to see something revealed.
Right.
The connection to that, to you, is something that did not elude me
Mm,
in your
that's
naming.
that's wonderful. Yeah, my mom just loved both of the name. My middle name is Antoinette. She wanted to go to France at one point, and so that's how she came up with Antoinette. And she loved the name Cassandra. Um, but yeah, later when I was doing all my, because I was so into all of those things, name meanings, astrology, and so when I saw that it meant a person who wasn't believed, a prophet who wasn't believed, I was like, oh my God. And then understood, read about the myth of Cassandra. Um, but I come from a family of prophets in the religious sense. And so to me, it's about, of course, and there were people who didn't necessarily believe some of the prophets, prophecies and visions that my very spiritual uncles and even my mother would tell, and one of my sisters as well. And so I don't necessarily, I believe in the power of telling your story or prophecy anyway, whether or not you're believed. And so perhaps that's why I was, given this name in a kind of, I don't know, maybe that's why I was given this name in a larger way, because part of my story is not true. The story, We Are Bridges, I had to make it up, but in a deeper way, in a larger way, it's true. And it's a form of prophecy, because I was really trying to get at the emotional truth of Burt and Mary and what happened to him. What I do know is that she loved him. She was crying over him on her deathbed when she was in her 90s, even though she had married this other man and was married to him for decades, moved to Louisiana from Mississippi. She still remembered Burt Bridges. And so I know that that's true. And so that's my take on that, that whether someone believes it or not, whether someone believes I had the right to, imagine a story for them or not, I still feel empowered to do that. And perhaps my name gives me a little bit of juju in that.
Yes, I thought about it a lot in terms of, how these were real names in your family constellation. And yet when you think about what you were doing with the story and the issues you were confronting, but also creating a vision for the future, a new vision for the future in your own mind's eye, I found that was something important to mention, and that I found was a part of the magic of your whole trajectory with this story and your family story
Wow,
as
thank you
well.
for that.
Yes. So I wanted to invite you to share with us a passage. I would love, this is just such a beautiful book, and I would love for us to imagine we're all sitting together in your beautiful landscape. It looks like you're surrounded in beauty and daylight still. And so we're sitting with you in this beautiful space in daylight, in the sunshine. And I was wanting to invite you to read to us from the page so that we can experience some of your lyrical writing, and was hoping that you might read the passage we talked about before, because I feel like it's really connected to this moment and its overall message, but also happy to read anything that you feel excited about as well.
Okay, come into my garden. My husband created this slice of beauty back here. And I think that was his therapy for, during the pandemic. So this did not look like this before the pandemic.
He did an excellent job. If he wants to come to my house, he is
Right.
welcome anytime. I will give you some.
Now
some
he's
good
completely
compensation.
obsessed. He's looking for projects. So yeah. So what I'm going to do, I am going to read that little piece, but I wanted to just read a little part of the prologue
Yes,
because I think
please.
it connects to that. A prologue. This story is a hybrid, a romance and a horror, a memoir and a fiction, forged out of what is known and what is unknown. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We sang as children of the South, as Black children of the South. It was a rhyming wall we erected to protect us from harsh words hurled at our bodies, their mission to shoot venom, to curl our brown frames. The truth is that words, like sticks and stones, like ropes and whips, do enter, As we get older, we press to silence any and all language that elicits pain. But sometimes, buried in this suppressed language is an ancestor, the power in a name. A different kind of hurt lingers in this stitched void. I wanted a creation story for my family, although what was lost, stolen, is long covered over by soil I will never be able to locate. When I was young, that was okay with me. The freedom of not being bound to the past, to all that heaviness. But I am a mother now, and freedom means something else to me entirely. I am pregnant with questions, laboring over the unanswered ones tucked in the bosoms of our nation, our ancestors, our living families, and even into my own heart. Here, I gathered the sticks, picked up the stones, went searching for the rope. Like a bird building her nest, there is filler, string, straw, scraps of paper, anything to make it hold, make it stick. And then I'll jump to that little section. Hanged inheritances. I was in my freshman year of college when I heard for the first time a recording of Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit. I repeatedly listened to her sing both Don't Explain and Strange Fruit, the former about a wayward lover, and the latter about the Black victims of a murderous South. The images and moods in these two songs, the hushing and howling, Billie's voice ringing with a huskiness my fingers could almost touch, all of it would merge in my mind until I saw lipstick smeared over twisted mouths and dead eyes bulging with hopes of greener pastures. I listened again and again until lovers' bodies and bloody roots entwined, and a sweet rot emanated from my own mouth. It seemed as though Billie were singing directly to our family. It seemed as though she were seeing us, the whole line of us, at least as far back as the age of Jim Crow. Psychologists call it trauma ghosting, the body's ability to remember a trauma that happened earlier in life or in an ancestor's life. It can manifest as an extreme and inappropriate reaction to anything that reminds the body of that early trauma. I think about my aversion to the stage, how my body shakes from its innermost core at the prospect of a crowd in front of me. Perhaps my body sees an audience, senses it, and remembers a mob staring at my great-grandfather Burt as he is about to be lynched, or as another ancestor is being whipped in front of a crowd, or as another is standing on top of a platform being sold. Let the dead bury the dead, Jesus said, but here I am, guilty of pining after my dead. Not knowing one's story is like being buried alive. The living pretend they don't know you're under the soil, but there you are, plain as dirt, providing a foundation over which they trample and build and move on with their lives. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm imagining, thank you for having us in your garden and taking us into your beautiful writing. And I want to open up to questions soon because I feel like we have just such a good group of people with us today. And so I want to make sure that we can get them in the conversation with us too in the garden. I'm sipping my tea out of my Black is Beautiful mug right now. So I'm just feeling really moved to bring in everyone here because I feel like in non-COVID times, this will be a time where we should be in community together, having these kinds of conversations.
Absolutely.
So last thing I want to ask you is now that you have your book out in the world, you've had your book birthday. I saw that your book was celebrated widely. It's been featured in NPR. I'm so thrilled and so proud. What are you working on next? Are you writing? I'm curious. You've written this beautiful book, but because I was so drawn by your writing and just, your voice just stood out so strongly, and in a statuesque way to me as a reader during the Louise Merriweather contest, I was wondering, have you been writing now that your book is done? Are you journaling, or are you working on any kinds of writing through the pandemic? And nothing formal, if you can't share, but I guess I just want to know how you've been connecting with your art.
Yeah, I miss it so much. So I guess no. I got a promotion at work, and I've been so super busy
Congrats.
at work, which I do a lot of writing at the magazine and a lot of editing, of course. But there is one little seed of an idea that I think has some juice to it, because I go to sleep, I think about it, I've talked to my husband about it, and I'll wake up. I've woken up a couple of times actually, and it was there, and like things were forming, and so I have journaled in a couple of different journals. So I need to put it all together about the idea. I don't really know. I mean, I see the characters, their age, their ethnicity, and it's about friendship. But I don't know where it's going. And I'm eager to meet them and see and follow. I don't know if it's fiction, if it's going to be essays. I have no idea, but I do miss my writing. I do miss writing.
Well,
And following. So it's one thing to jot things down here and there, but I miss like working on a piece. I love revision. I love revision even more than writing. So I miss that, having something to mold, and I revise in circles. And so I miss something that, and I've found myself doing that even with my book. So
well, I will say I love you. So just for everyone out here, from an editorial standpoint, Cassandra loves revision. I love that you love revision. Not everybody loves revision. So we would just look forward to getting your notes and your replies to us, because I was just always really moved by the experience of corresponding with you and the back and forth, because you genuinely do love revision. And I think that is a testament to your writing and your excellence. But I just want to share that with everyone here who may not love revision yet. Now, that is something I greatly admire in you. And
thank you.
one other thing I just felt like I needed to share before we do Q&A is that I did once have a great conversation with Nicole Dennis-Ben, who is amazing and a writer who I very much love. And we were talking about her book, Patsy. And we're talking about it in the context of characters. And so she was talking about how her characters come to her and kind of demand in a spiritual way to be heard, and they kind of tell her where the book's going. So when you were sharing that, I thought, oh, as someone who is moving between the worlds and the time and talking with the ancestors, I'm excited to see who your characters are and what stories they demand to be told.
Yeah, and you can't revise if you don't have anything on the page. So I need to get some stuff on the page so that I can enter that. I'm curious too, and I think, I'm interested in doing something. I think there's still more, with this story too, but I'm interested in doing something that's a little bit foreign too, and just outside my kind of immediate world. And these two characters are, so I will let you know.
I love it. I'm hanging on. I'm excited. I know I'm going to love your characters. And I see that your family's in the house right now too. And I'm really excited and to see that they're here as well, because I thought a lot throughout the reading process and editing this book about what a gift you're giving your family. But also the gift you're giving to readers to think about the relationship to family in a new way, and in an powerful way, and an empowered way. So I just want to say that, since I see some of your loved ones here right now.
Thank you so much.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing with me and us. And I have some questions, so I'm going to dive right in if you feel ready to hear from some of our guests tonight. So I have Gabriella, or is it Gabrielle Ballard?
Gabe, that's Gabe. Hi, Gabe.
Gabe. And Gabe is asking, how did you take care of yourself mentally, spiritually, and emotionally when the conjuring and writing of this masterpiece became too heavy?
Oh, thanks, Joe. So I was telling someone else this the other day. I think because part of my saving grace is that I am so busy. You know, I have a child, I have full-time work. So when you're working on something, you know, themes that are this heavy, I think it's probably easier. Maybe I would have finished sooner if I would have been able to sink into it for long periods of time. But I had these little snatches of time, that was often frustrating. But I think it was also a little bit of a lifesaver too, in terms of just mental health, because I wasn't able to write for, you know, hours on end. And so just the daily grind, for one, of going about just my daily life, balanced that out somewhat. And then I love to explore my city. I love to be a tour. I've been here in Los Angeles for 20 years this year, and I still love being a tourist. I love hiking. I love nature, the beach, all the museums, all the restaurants, everything, all the food. So all of those things that bring me so much joy balanced out, you know, the writing of this. I love hanging out with friends. There were some friends who didn't know what I was writing or how heavy it was. And I'm very gregarious with friends. I laugh a lot. I just think that all of that is important when you're working on anything, but especially something that's this heavy. Massages, lots of bubble baths, you know, fun time with the family, and therapy. Definitely talking to a therapist. I have a friend who has like her therapist who helps her through her writing journey. So I think actually that I want to talk to someone now that I've finished this project. I've had some emotional moments come up, and so that's something that I'm looking at too in terms of self-care.
I think that's so important to share too, because the writing of trauma, while you're getting re-traumatized in our culture, is really heavy and real. We need resources for that. So I'm really glad that you're sharing this with our community, for folks who are writing and exploring how do we navigate this at this time. So Janet has a great question. What was your greatest discovery in writing this book?
One of my biggest ones was recent, and it was actually during the audio recording of the book. So I see this book, you know, it's about my ancestors, it's about motherhood, but there was a point in reading the book out loud where I had my first breakdown, and I was like, oh my God, that's not where I would have thought I would have broken down. And it was a section about my father. And I think the revelation for me was that there was, you know, there's so much unhealed. I thought I was over that situation. My father wasn't, after the divorce, wasn't around. And so I did a lot of therapy and work on that in my 20s and early 30s, and felt like that was all beyond me. But in reading it out loud, there was pain, and I thought, wow, how much of this story, even the search for Burt Bridges, was my own father story. So that was very revelatory.
Thank you. Ooh, okay, this one's interesting. I like this one. What was the biggest structural challenge for telling this story? I'm really curious about that too, because I felt like you were a passionate reviser. So I felt like you were a dream structurally, but I'm curious about how that feels to you, because I know that you'd been working on this for a long time too.
Well, that was my biggest challenge, period. I feel like I approach structure so many different ways. I don't even remember everything. By character, by geography, by time period. So it was, the struggle was trying to wrangle, you know, all of these different pieces and these different eras into one cohesive project. And my editors, you guys really helped me with that. One of the biggest pieces of editorial direction that I got was to create some new ancestral stories. And I think that it was genius, first of all. And I was excited. At first I was like, oh my gosh, I have this deadline. But then I was excited to reintroduce myself to Mary and Burt and some of the minor characters around them. And I think it balanced out some of the modern storytelling. And we actually cut a lot of the modern storytelling. And so that, just having that outside, because, you know, in workshop, people are looking at a chapter here, a chapter there, and not the whole book. And so my editors, you guys helped me because you looked at the whole book and you were able to say, okay, let's take out these sections, but we need you to add some new vignettes. And then once I started writing those, they came to me a little bit easier than I thought. And I got into the flow of it. I was back in 1904 with Mary and Burt. And it started flowing. Yeah.
So Elizabeth says, I'm so impressed by your writing and how you wove together memoir, history, and the imagined past. You gave so much of yourself in this book. How did your family react to telling their story in this way?
Oh, thank you so much, Elizabeth. So my family is reading it. I sent it to an early draft to my ex-husband because we were, you know, I was sharing a painful part of our story, and I wanted to make sure that there were some things that I had remembered correctly. He's a storyteller with a camera. He's a photographer, and we're still great friends. And so he was very supportive, but there were some parts where he felt like, you know, that's not how it happened. And so I was able to correct based on his feedback. I felt very supported. And I feel very privileged to have, in his case, you know, his support in telling a story that was personal. My mother is a storyteller. She's a musician, but she loves telling oral stories. So much of this book came from, you know, vignettes that I would get from her on the phone. Hi, Mom. Just about, you know, my grandmothers, my sister, when my middle sister is an artist. She's not that much in the book, but they're just very, very supportive. I was always that kid in the corner with books and paper, not talking much. And so they tolerate me. They knew I had to do it.
I love it. And I love what you're talking about with memory too, right? That we remember it differently depending on our vantage point. So that's always the thing I find fascinating about family stories as well, that we remember it based on our experience. And so I love that you're sharing that part too, because I was very curious as well, because I had the honor of seeing your beautiful photos of your family when we were working on the cover and seeing the history and kind of seeing that, oh, this is a story that involves a lot of people that we meet through these pages. So Nikki has a question and a balloon for congratulations in case you can't see it. Very cute that you did that. And the question is, what kept you writing? Sitting there start to finish to get this story out of your head and onto paper. And congratulations from Nikki Rivers.
Oh, thank you so much, Nikki. Thanks for being here, everyone. I had to write this story. I knew that I couldn't write other books until I wrote this story. And so in a way it was, I felt like, you know, I was a prison to this story. I didn't want to be, I was in a prison and I didn't want to be a prisoner of this story. I felt a responsibility to tell it. I was obsessed with it. And once I got in it, I didn't feel like I could, you know, there were of course years where I wasn't writing much. But I didn't feel good about myself just leaving it and moving into something else. You know, whether I write something that's comedy or of course much lighter, I just don't feel like I can do it. I didn't feel like I could do it until I had genuinely given this project my all. And so that kept me going. I don't like to leave things unfinished. and I just knew that I would never forgive myself if I didn't give it my all and attempt to get it published and to share it.
Mm.
And then my son, wanting him to have something. He didn't grow up in that rich environment that I grew up in with grandparents and, several generations of us. All of our grandparents were gone by the time he was born. And so I wanted to honor them and record their voices, their stories, and be able to pass that on to him too. So I felt also a responsibility to finish for him.
Mm. It's beautiful. I love when you were saying I don't like to leave things untied. I thought, oh, you definitely don't. You would go back into history to make sure that they get tied. So I love that about you. It's true. It's very true. So I have a question from Leslie and John, which is, on the lighter side, what is your favorite work snack?
My favorite work, tea. I love tea and creamy tea. I can't get started with a piece of writing if I don't have my tea, with usually like vanilla infused, with some cream and a little honey, and my incense burning. So there you go, Jamia. And
yeah, no, it's a mood. I'm kind of like, oh yeah, we definitely need to get together because I'm definitely into the incense. I have a little essential oil set up right here. I set an intention before our conversation tonight. So it's a mood, and we are sipping some lemongrass tea in the moment. So
I love cooking with lemongrass. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's what it is. That's my snack. I love crunchy stuff too. And you know what I do when I'm stressed about a piece of writing or just on deadline? I chew, and I think I talked to Leslie about this. I chew gum, like I make sure it's sugar-free, so it's usually Trident, or it has to be Trident bubble gum, and I can go through 2 packs. So that keeps me going. That keeps me going.
So I love that question too, right? Because the artist process, that's the realist. We need to know what keeps you fueled. So now I'm going to imagine you chewing that gum, right? But I like it because it's like keeping you going, keeping you going.
Exactly.
So what we just got a question about your son. So I love it. The synergy you just answered. One of our last questions that we had here from Darlene in the Q&A, but I also know there were a couple of questions in chat that I want to make sure that we get to as well, to make sure that everybody who has asked can be asked. So I really like this question right here. This is from Tanya, who is asking, wow, do you really like revision? How? You're the first writer of revision. How do you do revision?
That is hilarious. I don't know. I wonder if part of it is that, I started as a journalist so young, first on campus at my college. I don't know. And then I worked with editors in my early 20s. And when you're on deadline working on 5 stories a day, and you just don't have time to personalize it, and you realize that, you're growing through this editing. So I value it. I value editors. It's an art form. So that's one side of it. And then just the way my brain works, even if it's a conversation, it goes back over things. And so writing allows me to really have fun with going back over things, choosing different words, looking at a situation in a broader way or in a more focused way. I love it. Somebody talked about, I think it was Nikki Finney said, revision is holy. And there's a book that I love. It's so dog-eared. It's Revision is Spiritual Practice. And she has these exercises, and it's so beautiful the way she talks about revision as this spiritual practice. And for me, that's what it is. So I encourage writers to try to embrace it, or maybe pick up that book and see if you can glean a few of those, that wisdom to allow you to re-enter your work in that way. I just like going back over things, and writing is it's like I don't know, I like things that take a long time to cook. Gumbo, I'm from the South, soups, and revision allows you to do that.
I love that. And gumbo. I love gumbo. I love that you brought that to the fore because it is very magic and healing in all the ways. So I did want to just say too, when you said that revision is sacred, I think you should do a TED talk on that. I feel like I know a lot of writers who need to see that, who would benefit from that. And I'm just saying, I think there's an opportunity there. But so I just wanted to say that. I see a note here from Sydney who's saying that it's not a question, but it's really amazing how you've managed to balance home and work life through this whole writing process. So proud of you, Cassandra. So
Oh,
I was wondering
thank
if you can speak to that, because I've had a lot of people ask me about this, people who've said, I just don't have time to write. I have kids, I have pets, I have elders to care for, I have a job with so many hours. What kinds of words of wisdom could you share to people who have a passion to write in their lives, who have books or a book that they want to get out in the world, but feel like their commitments are holding them back? What is it that fueled you?
Yeah. So first, I just have to be transparent and say that I don't feel like I'm doing any of it, all the time in this great, amazing way, 100%. And someone was speaking to this recently. I think we put so much as women. I don't know if men typically do that. Sorry. But as women, we think that we have to do everything well all the time. And I think it was freeing to me to read an essay from a mom who talked about how this whole idea of balance sets women up for failure and to beat up on ourselves even more. And what she had eased her way into was a sense of rhythm. So maybe something, is falling down a little bit. I don't know, I'm not cooking. I'm not cooking this month or this week or whatever. But she's, excelling over here in her career and her art. Maybe the kids aren't as, they're not doing as much of the extracurricular activities as you want them to do because you've decided we're only going to do baseball. I'm not going to do, because I need to also have this time for myself. If you have a partner that can help, but we're all so super busy. But I think first just giving yourself, and I said this to someone the other day, I was so busy last year with the project. My son's at home, remote schooling. At work, we pivoted and working so much harder than even before. And I felt like my grip on his education slipped. Luckily, I do have a partner. My husband was working with him on his math, but I definitely felt like I was out of sync with his teachers and what was going on. And so I had to give myself a break and let his dad do more of the work in that situation, and realize that there are going to be times where I have a little bit more time, like right now. And I've been working with him on his long-term paper that they're doing. So I think we just have to give ourselves a little bit of a break and realize that we can't do everything 100% all the time. And then just claim your space. For me, getting up at 4:30 in the morning before the rest of the house is awake was a way to claim my space. And then my husband started waking up earlier. I'm like, earlier and earlier. And I'm like, no, this is my time. What are you doing? So just claim your space in terms of time, in terms of wherever you can find to write or create whatever art you do. And don't don't apologize for it.
I love it. And I remember thinking, as a lock wearer, that I'm thinking, wow, her locks always look completely laid perfectly, and she's able to do all of this, but I love it. So I would be remiss if I didn't say it, and then I loved once I saw you post with your son and you were posting lock day online. And that was just so beautiful to see that you were taking the time and space, like you said, to carve out the sacred space to do those things that matter. And so you're also modeling that, yes, that's the most important time, maybe we balance things out, but I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, this is really beautiful to see. And I'm so glad you shared that out in the world with us as well. But I did have that wonder, how's she balancing it all in addition to having amazing?
Yeah, that's great. And I love that moment too. I love, playing in his hair. He's begging me for locks. he did when he was 9, but then that lasted like a month after we did all this work and spent all this money. So I was like, I'm not taking you to the professional optician until you are sure. If you want to do locks, you know, in the pandemic, he wasn't, of course, getting a haircut. I'll start them and we'll see how long you like it this time. He's like, no, Mom, I'm 13 now. I really want it. I'm going to keep them this time. Oh, man, imagine if I had kept them, how long my hair would be, and just every day. And so I did finally sit down and I started the 2-strand twists, but they started getting, you know, pretty unkempt because I just didn't have a lot of time to work on them. And so that Sunday I had told him, hey, we're going to work on your hair today. We're going to retwist your hair today. And so there are moments where, and it's starting to lock now, which is great. I'm loving watching his lock journey. But now that he's older, I mean, if you have little kids, it's a little bit harder to explain to him, but I'm honest with him. I feel like I'm working so much and I'm not there to talk to you as much as I'd want or check in on what you're doing. We do a lot of hugs, so many hugs, especially, you know, being in the house together during the pandemic. And I feel like sometimes just a bunch of hugs during the day is like the only communication we've had, because I haven't had a chance to like really sit down with him. But I'm honest about it and I tell him I'm working on this. When I get past this magazine galley or this book deadline or what have you, we're going to go do something. And we do mother-son dates. You can't like try to keep track and see, well, is it balanced? Because no, it's not balanced. Maybe we had that one day, but the rest of the week we weren't, you know, together as much. But we're going to enjoy that one day that we have out at the beach or wherever. So
I love it. And I love it because it's important to talk about the joy. Like we said, we were talking before we came together tonight around celebrating the joy, as even though we're in the midst of grief, because they can't steal our joy. So I'm so glad that we're talking about this and having that be an important note in the conversation as well, and this bridge relationship between you and your son as well. So I now want to thank Cassandra and turn it over to Nia, who has some closing questions and remarks for us. And it's been a real honor to be on this journey with you for We Are Bridges, but also to see it out in the world, and just wish you many, many more flowers in the coming weeks and months and
thank
beyond.
you so much. Thank you, Jamia. So good to see you.
This has been such a joyful conversation to listen to both of you. So I want to thank you. I do have one question, Cassandra. I would love to know who some of your literary ancestors or inspirations are, because your writing is so poetic. So who inspires you just broadly?
Oh, as a poet and as a mom, Lucille Clifton. I found myself turning to her so much. Of course, Toni Morrison. I love Toni Morrison's work, as we all do. James Baldwin. But I in writing this book, I did find myself turning to Lucille Clifton more than others at certain points, as I was, you know, attempting to understand. When I first started writing, I wasn't a mom, but as I was attempting to understand motherhood and understand maybe what my, you know, grandparents, my own mother went through, she was just such a balm and such an inspiration. And so her work is just, it's so revealing, and it's so honest, and you can touch it. It's so tangible.
I love that. And I have some of those same literary ancestors and inspirations. I know someone mentioned Toni Morrison earlier, a common theme amongst writers.
Yes, and Paul Marshall, I have to say, in terms of just her rich language and characters.
Well, that's wonderful. And thank you again, both Jamia and Cassandra, for this conversation. And thank you all for being here and attending this program and supporting. As Elizabeth put in the chat, I encourage everyone to buy a copy of We Are Bridges. It is truly a beautiful read, and I encourage all of you to experience that. We also have information about a quick program survey in the chat, so if you can just take a few moments to fill that out. All of your feedback really helps us know how to best serve our communities. And if you are able to financially support the museum, you can make donations for our website or by texting the number 56512 and typing MOAD SF. any and all ways of supporting, showing up, continuing to come to these programs, supporting our artists and our authors, all of that is impactful. And so thank you again to both of you. Thank you all for sharing in this space. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Nia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Moed and Jamia. This was so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you, Jamia.
Take care.
Bye.